My name is Marina and I welcome you to another edition of Knights Templar International News. Last week I told you about the sinister people who fund Tommy Robinson and the so-called counter-jihad movement. We looked at what the Shillman Fellow caption on his videos really means, and we learned that he is part of a huge and well-funded Zionist propaganda operation. So now I'm going to tell you what they are up to and why. Robinson's close association with Zionist extremists goes beyond Britain and Canada. Last year he was invited to visit Israel by another well-connected Zionist propagandist, Brian Thomas. Blogging under the name Brian of London, Thomas is leading member of the massive Zionist operation to flood social media with pro-Israeli propaganda. Brian can be seen in this photo posted on Twitter by Israeli army spokesperson Barak Raz. Robinson's host is shown standing between Raz on the right and the Jewish agency's social media propagandist Avi Meir. This appears to be more than just a fleeting meeting, as Meir, himself a former Israeli army spokesperson, has tweeted about meeting with Brian of London in February as well. It was Brian Thomas who posted this photo of Robinson smiling as he holds an automatic rifle while standing on an Israeli tank in the occupied Golan Heights. No ordinary Israeli citizen would be allowed to take a British guest into a military zone and to photograph him standing on an Israeli tank. This fact supports the claim by Arab activists that Brian's blogging operation is closely linked to Israeli military intelligence. I will end this broadcast by addressing a point that might have crossed the mind of any viewer who has fallen for the Zionist propaganda about brave little Israel supposedly being our only ally against terrorism. After all, if that was true, no one could criticize Tommy Robinson for taking money and orders from the Zionists behind the so-called counter-jihad movement. But of course, it is not true. As we have already seen, it was the neocon Zionist elite who deliberately pushed America and her NATO allies into war in Iraq and Libya. And it was those Zionist wars that destroyed those countries' secular governments and so opened the door for Al-Qaeda and ISIS. The same people were behind Obama's policy of arming Islamist rebels in Syria, and Israel itself has sided with the Islamist terrorists against Syria's moderate, anti-Islamist and pro-Christian government for the whole of the civil war. Thousands of injured Al-Qaeda and ISIS fighters have been treated in Israeli military hospitals, while Israeli jets have repeatedly bombed Syrian forces fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda terrorists. As for the threat of Islamization in the West, Zionist lobby groups have for years been among the biggest promoters of mass Muslim immigration in every Western country. And even now they have decided to oppose Muslim migrants. They are still noisy supporters of the project to destroy the identity of the West through mass immigration by other groups. That's why Tommy Robinson and all their other puppets support immigration and multiculturalism. They paymasters want to see us replaced in our own countries. As for the Muslims already in the West, the Zionist and US deep state aim is not to defuse the time bomb they did so much to create, but to wind up tensions between Islam and the rest of us. Why? There are two main reasons. First, elites always use the tactics of divide and rule to keep the peasants under control. While we are fighting each other, they can go on looting the world through globalization. And second, the Zionists need Islamist terror in the West to frighten ordinary, decent, assimilated Jews into packing up and moving to Israel. That is why Zionist bankers funded the rise of Hitler, and it's why the fake counter-jihad movement is so keen to use cartoons of Mohammed and other provocations in order to drive young Muslims into the arms of the extremists. And they don't just want violence on our street. The Zionist propaganda machine is also trying to incite yet another war that is not in our interests. Because they want a war against Iran and Hezbollah, whose fighters have played a bigger part than anyone other than the Syrian army and Russian Air Force in crushing jihadis and protecting Christians in Syria. Those brave men and women are the West's natural allies in the real war on terror, but they oppose the Zionist push for a greater Israel on stolen Arab land, so the Zionists want to see them destroyed. Which can only be done with a war, a big war, for which they want your sons, your daughters and your taxes. And to get Western support for their planned war on Syria and Iran, they spread the lie that Islamist terror comes from Iran, when in truth it comes exclusively from the Sunni ally of Israel and the US deep state, Saudi Arabia. Once again, they are trying to push us to take the wrong side in a war that has nothing to do with us. So Tommy Robinson taking money to be a Zionist shill is not a laughing matter. It is deadly serious, an act of treason against the British people, everything as bad as the treachery of the UK political elite who dragged Britain into war on the wrong side in Iraq and Libya. One day these traitors will be called to account for their crimes. That is certain. Deus vult.